Welcome to Running on Reddit. Like and subscribe, or you'll be running on fumes. I used to work as a civilian employee for a military department, but it was like a normal office job in most respects, so I don't think this is a good fit for our military stories. We prepared briefing packets for the personnel involved in upcoming military operations, so that everyone knew what maneuvers would be performed, with which vehicles, and in what order, and for every briefing we would probably make about 20 packets and each packet was probably about 30 to 40 pages. We would print one packet and then make copies on a standard photocopier, but the copier we were provided by our program office was just a light duty model that could not handle the intense load of making copies constantly to support multiple briefings a day. There was a rule that the machine had to make about 20,000 copies a month before the program office would pay for a heavier duty model. We would get our copier fixed, and it would work for 3 to 4 days, during which time it would make about 14,000 copies, but then it would fail, and be down for weeks again. The copy machine repairman was out so frequently we joked about letting him leave his coffee cup there, and join our coffee mess. If the machine was working properly we would easily exceed the 20,000 copy threshold for a heavier duty machine, but it never stayed working for more than a few days at a time after being fixed. The next time the machine broke down I decided to go use the copier outside the program office, tying up their machine. I started telling everyone else what I was doing, and they played along, tying up the machine outside the program office for days. After a few days our machine was broken, and the program office machine failed under the added workload too. Apparently, the program office didn't like the fact that their machine was always busy or broken now, because this time our copier wasn't just fixed, it was replaced with a machine that could actually handle the workload we needed from it. I don't know if this should count as revenge or just spreading discontent to those who need it most, an expression I learned on this job, but we got what we wanted. That's a good way to get things done. Clever thinking by OP. One summer I was working as a server at a well-known pizza restaurant. It was in a small tourist town, so it was amazing money, and as a university student, that was all that mattered to me. This job was so horrible that I would go home wanting to quit, count my tips, and decide I could put up with it for one more day. The reason it was so horrible was because of the manager, Tracy. Tracy was hot-headed, irrational, a liar, a manipulator, and overall a terrible human being. I watched her terrorize the other servers and kind of kept my head down to avoid it. Examples of her being awful: she once screamed at me because the entire restaurant didn't have cutlery on the tables, because the restaurant physically didn't have enough, and she was too cheap to order more. I was in the middle of filling drinks for a table when she made me stop and go into the kitchen to run the dishwasher. She then yelled at me because that table didn't have full drinks. This all happened in front of a guest who ended up saying something to Tracy about her behavior. After Tracy left, the guest assured me that she was going to be reporting her once another server was running her food. Tracy physically grabbed the server by the arm and pulled her back into the kitchen because that server didn't run the ticket before hers. They got into a screaming match and the cops were called. The server sent me photos of her bruised arm the next day. Tracy played the cops like a fiddle and was like that never happened and batted her eyelashes. I'm not sure how she got away with that. My sister was the hostess and was only making $12 a week in tip out. The other servers and I did the math and my sister should have been taking home $40 a night. Ironically, Tracy had a new boat and a new truck. My sister messed up, I don't remember how, and Tracy took me into the back of the restaurant to scream at me. We were out there for a full 15 minutes before the supervisor told her they needed me back. This supervisor was an angel, and she comes back into the story a bit. This was a while ago, and I'm sure I'll think of more, but for now I will continue with the story. Tracy's reputation in the town was awful. The locals would not eat there because of her. In a small community, everyone had a story about her. I would get sympathy when people found out where I worked. So that tells you just how bad it was. Supervisors told the franchisees about how bad the working conditions were, but every time they would investigate she would turn into a completely different person. She was kind and helpful, and working for that side of her wasn't so bad. But when they weren't there the working conditions were awful again. It seemed like they would never catch her in her natural element. The revenge part of my story began on my last day of work. We had a health inspection and failed, so I knew Tracy would be particularly awful that day. I looked at the angel of a supervisor and told her that if Tracy screamed at me then I was walking out. The supervisor said she wouldn't blame me and didn't know why I had put up with it for so long. So anyways, Tracy gets in and of course she starts yelling at me until I start crying. I finished my last table and walked out, taking my sister with me. Down 2 staff members. The restaurant was in trouble. We drove by it 30 minutes later and there was a lineup out the door because there was no hostess seating people. Tracy had to seat people and serve my section. When I got home I messaged all the staff that had quit over the summer. I told them that I was whistleblowing and that they should too. The girl that was physically assaulted ended up writing a letter and sending photos of her bruised arm. My letter ended up being 2 pages long, single-spaced, and included everything I've mentioned, with emphasis on her having 2 different personalities when the franchisers were there. A few months later my sister got a message from the dishwasher saying that Tracy got fired and the angel supervisor took her position. Because of that, I decided to go back the following summer. I was hired immediately. While working there I discovered the results of my actions. The restaurant was rated the lowest in the country under Tracy's management. This, coupled with the whistleblowers and the civilian complaints, resulted in serious investigation. I don't remember how high up in the company he was, but a higher up ended up going to the restaurant under the intent that he was a new supervisor coming to help because she was short-staffed. He observed her behavior for 2 weeks. After the 2 weeks he told her, here's a step-by-step plan of how we are going to fix the restaurant. Her response was, who the flip do you think you are? I guess when he told her, the expression on her face was priceless. I wish I saw it. Anyway, she obviously got fired and is now working at a fast food pizza place in the same town. The place is always empty because the locals still actively boycott her. The locals know what's up. I'm surprised that a pizza place still hired her after all that. They must be losing a ton of business. Let me know in the comments down below if you've ever had an angel supervisor. Backstory. So basically I worked at a fast casual burger chain. It's not a very large one, but it was franchised. This chain I worked at was owned and managed by a very young university dropout who had his parents buy him this franchise. It was entirely staffed by females plus me, male. He had no experience in managing or leading a restaurant. I had worked there as part of the original crew and eventually became a supervisor there. This is when the problems start. I was a 15-year-old male working part-time, so he didn't take many of my opinions seriously. When I got my first paycheck I noticed no pay increase. It is generally a well-known fact that increased responsibilities meant increased pay of any sort. This is when I started to dislike working there, as I was supervising adults who were being paid more than I was simply because adults had a higher minimum wage. His response to me was that he couldn't afford it. While I obviously can't prove it, but with my shifts under my leadership our customer reviews were consistently 5-star reviews. I never once received lower than 5 stars during my shifts as I focused on customer service. The manager, however, was greedy and never understood the concept of customer service. With many shifts, when a customer would complain about cold fries or an undercooked burger he simply would tell them they were wrong. Of course, these customers were never to return. He was a cocky dumbhead, and he was a horrible manager who consistently was absolutely useless. Due to his treatment of customers, he had an abysmal income of roughly $8,000 per week. A manager should never be making comments on their employees. AKA me and another employee, my friend, that we were too fat to be sitting on his chair cause we would break it with our weight. I play football. I'm not fat. I just have a large muscle mass. Nuclear revenge. One time I worked during a holiday and was expecting the provincial holiday pay in accordance with provincial requirements. He never paid me appropriately, and when I, along with many other coworkers under my direction, approached him about the pay, he promptly told me it was not my place to talk to him about the law as he was the owner. I was just a high schooler, and said to me, according to the law you are not entitled to this pay, which was not accurate whatsoever. Whatever. One night during a close, which I had covered for the only other supervisor who had called in sick, we had no customers, none, for the 2 hours leading up to close. So I made the decision to shut down the fryers 15 minutes early so that our staff could get out earlier. This would have saved him money. Of course, we had a customer come in 5 minutes before close and I greeted him. He asked for only fries and of course, I had to, unfortunately, let him know that we had no fries left as we were about to close. This customer begged for us to turn on the fryers again and make them fries, and I said no. That's a story for another subreddit. This customer angrily left and left me my first and only 1-star review because we were out of fries at that time. I understand that had I left the fryers on, this would have been avoided. Regardless, the next morning I arrived at my shift and he approached me and gave me a verbal warning about the incident and said that he would be deducting the cost of the fries, the order and a penalty for the 1-star rating at a cost of $80. Something he had never done before with anyone. After he did that with me, furious about this request as it was completely unfair, I did some legal research. I then screenshotted the appropriate legislation and texted him saying that it was completely illegal. He didn't respond. 10 minutes before the end of my shift he fired me for repeated poor performance. After this, I informed all of my prior colleagues about the incident and asked them all to contact the Ontario Labour Board, and so began the arduous process of the Labour Board. 8 months later the Labour Board sided with all of us for wrongful terminations. I received $3,500 from my termination along with my termination pay as it turns out. In fact, he did underpay me on every single one of my holiday shifts, and I'm not too sure how much the others received. But overall from all of us, it totaled around $15,000 to $18,000. I then got a job right next door at a restaurant whose glass faces my previous workplace, and every morning I got to see him running around as he was short-staffed and many of my coworkers quit when I was fired because he was the devil to work with. I found out after this from his cousin, who went to high school with me, that he had sold his car to pay for our bills. A 2017 Mercedes C300, stopped paying royalties, and then got sued by the franchise owners for breach of contract. The restaurant was subsequently shut down, and he was out of income, over $1.50 in fries. From last I heard, he now works at his father's fast food restaurant as a regular employee. Too long didn't read. I was fired for $1.50 in fries and subsequently shut down the owner's business, got him sued and forced him to sell his car. What a horrible owner. You would expect him to think about legal implications before making such stupid decisions. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe and turn on the bell or you'll be running on fumes. See you in the next video.